schooling is very important because it's a very central issue for many reasons. For social reasons, there are growing demand by parents, many social classes and also political classes for education. Education is one of the engines to the economy and to the society. So if we want to understand how the world is going on, we have to clearly understand how education is proceeded, is implemented locally, nationally and regionally.
The topic of the 14th Symposium on Knowledge and Space is on Geography of Schooling. Like the other 13 symposia, it is financed by the Klaus Tschira Stiftung. That gives us the opportunity to invite scholars from all over the world, from various disciplines, to meet here and discuss the problems of schooling. Special focus is on rural schools, because the big problems in many countries are the rural, the remote peripheral areas with low density of population where schools are closed, and a lot of communities fighting for their schools because they are afraid if they lose school, they lose their identity and their attractiveness.
The small schools are very important because school is a kind of a center. The school as an institution isn't only the school, it also often integrates the kindergarten. There are the clubs of sorts which engage in the school, and this is necessary for building a regional identity. And if you've got a regional identity, you belong to that region and you would like to stay. And if we want young people to stay there, then we have to educate them like that. There's a book which is called Learning to Leave, and learning to leave is the worst way. We educate them and then they are going to leave into the urban areas, so we should learn them to stay.
It's very important that we acknowledge and understand the interrelationships between the local context and the actual work of the teachers and the school themselves, and how that interrelationship operates within a field of education, but increasingly, as we were showing in our paper, necessitates the staff and the head teacher to respond to the field of the economy, as increasingly there are pressures from things such as new public management to do with performativity, standards, inspection, etc., that teachers have to deal with and head teachers have to deal with in a local context. So it's not as if they're free agents to be able to operate how they want. It's very important to understand how they have to interact with their local context.
My research of the last years was in aged mixed learning. There I got to know quite a lot of small rural schools in Austria, which are, because age mixed learning is getting quite popular now, really developing, very interesting, that some of the small rural schools are able to attract students from towns nearby because of their innovative teaching and learning program.
Well, the future of schooling in rural areas is a big question, actually. Because for the one thing, we have seen in several presentations that in some regions of Germany, schools have been closed because small schooling was unpopular. School closure is very much related to demographic decline, so the pupils' numbers depends and influences very much the political decision whether a school needs to be closed or not. And there is a legislative framework that is usually put into action. What is interesting in Schleswig-Holstein now that we have with the arrival of refugee children, that some mayors and some communities see a lot of hope that their school can survive simply because they can raise a number of children, and that way they try to save their schools.
So I'm an urban social political geographer, and I've now most recently got a project that funds the comparison between 3 cities. So that's Toronto, Havana in Cuba, and Kolkata in India. What I'll be talking about in this conference is the beginnings of that, as more of a geopolitical framing of education, and look at questions of displacement through the lens of migrants, forced migrants in particular, and how spaces of schooling allow that sort of community and sort of city to emerge that allows for questions of peace, questions of collaboration, community to emerge in the most successful way.
I've been fascinated at this conference by how much interest there is in urban-rural divisions, because in the UK the debates would be about social class or perhaps about ethnicity, class-divided society, and that has much more impact on outcomes for children, outcomes for families, than it does whether you live in an urban or rural area. The state, the boundary between what's a family role and what's a state role, has changed under neoliberalism, and the state has expanded its territory to incorporate aspects of social reproduction that would have previously been the area of family responsibility. The state is taking more control in family life.
I think in some school systems we now see the emergence of a so-called middle years movement. So teachers, school principals and school administrators discuss quite vividly the question of what should schools look like to work for adolescents. So how is learning to be organized so that adolescents are motivated to learn and they enjoy being in school. Some school systems have not really started this discussion, whereas others, based on all the research out there on adolescent development, on the change of the adolescent body, the adolescent psyche, are making adjustments in the way they are organizing schools. And this is very much in line with the shift from the industrial to the information age, because working patterns of adults are also changing.
This research is about Hungary, about how rural schools were perceived by politicians, by planners, even by the academic elite in the interwar period and then in the communist period. On the one hand, it was a propagandistic goal, but also a goal for economic interests to provide equal access to education at the same standard. And many people were living in the countryside, so one would assume that rural schools must have been very important in this process then. But on the other hand, the system was strongly interested in centralization in terms of political power and in terms of economic resources as well, and in cost efficiency, somehow dissolving those small rural schools. And this dichotomy was dominant all over the communist period. And basically it resulted in that people who were living in the countryside were motivated, to use a diplomatic term, to move to urban centers or at least to relatively big villages. So the concept was something like finding a balance between equal access to education and saving money. And the concept was that if rural people will move to urban centers, then both problems can be solved.
I think it's an absolutely fantastic forum to bring together an array of scholars who are connected or speaking around similar themes, but potentially coming at it from different kind of disciplinary backgrounds and traditions. I think it's rare that such interdisciplinary spaces are available to academics, and of course the hosting has been superb and the location could not be bettered.